This is Terms of Reference podcast number 148.
What are those game changers that are emerging right now? And how do we blend them together in a way that is immediately applicable in our work?
This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. We've been fortunate enough to have guests on this show from across the entire spectrum of the social sector, and really from around the world. One of the common issues we've talked about is resource scarcity, and how that presents both unique opportunities for innovation and challenges in terms of programming, priorities, and management. Today, we're going to look at the other side of the coin and discuss the challenges and opportunities associated with an organization that's focused on helping solve some of the world's most challenging problems, but also has scale and the very real ability to leverage that scale. My guest today is Jamey Butcher. He is an executive vice president at Chemonics and currently leads the Strategic Communications and Solutions Division. I'm excited about this episode because I think it really gives a peek under the hood of what is possible within a large development organization. Just to give you a taste, we cover things like how Chemonics approaches ICT for D, how they're working to make internal communications and learning sexy, the focus of several strategic partnerships, and the missing middle in impact investing. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. So with that said, I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the 148th episode of the Terms of Reference podcast. I spoke with Jamey in Virginia. But, of course, before we get started, a quick shout out from our sponsor.
The Terms of Reference podcast is sponsored by International Solutions Group, helping to improve the social impact of governments, UN agencies, NGOs, and companies for more than 10 years. Visit ISG online at www.theisg.com.
Hello, Jamey. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me.
We're recording this in early February 2017. You are truly a man of the world. Where do we find you sitting today?
Well, actually, I'm in the Arlington suburbs. I just got my kids off to school, and so I'm here on a sunny day in the morning doing this podcast.
Congratulations. The toughest part of the day is now over. I mean, I have three of them. Everybody on the podcast knows I talk about them a lot, and getting them off to school, that's usually the hardest part of the day for me anyway.
That's right. By 9 o'clock, we've done more than most people do all day.
Exactly. You are an executive vice president at Chemonics, which is a company many people who are listening know very well. You've been there for a long time. You're in the Strategic Communications Solutions Division. You also head up a supply chain division as well. People know Chemonics really well. I'd love to hear, what's Chemonics mean to you today? If you were positioning Chemonics or sort of saying, this is what the company means today, what would you put out there on the table?
Yeah, I think so. I've been with Chemonics around 20 years now, and the thing I've always loved about it and remains the same is that we have this chance to work around the world on some of the biggest and smallest problems that people are facing and find the brightest minds to bring around the table and really look at the issues and figure out different ways forward and test them out. And that philosophy that we have of really bringing people together that have come from different walks of life and have a variety of different points of view, and primarily and increasingly from, importantly, the countries that we work in, has really been the thing to me that's kept me coming back and I think makes Chemonics a special place.
Mm. One of the things that, or the focus of what we like to talk about here is innovation, and it's tough to talk about that with a company that's as big as Chemonics, right? Because you have such a huge platform, so many different programs and those kinds of things. But I was tickled when I was sort of doing some research. I was just doing some last minute research on the company and you before I started the show or before we started recording. You have a blog post that went out yesterday on February 7th about how drones can help in humanitarian emergencies. Now, obviously, drones are it's not a new conversation, but tell me about how Chemonics is using things like drones, using things like mobile technology, using new processes, or maybe you rely on old solutions to sort of bend and stretch how we are changing how we deliver assistance to people in need today.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Innovation's a challenging topic to talk about, I think, both outside of Chemonics, we hear it, and then inside of Chemonics as well. And part of it has to do with the fact that we work in such a wide variety of settings. And so one of the things, one of the basic things we're looking at is how can we better connect everybody around the world. And how can we get our staff who are working the 4,000 people in the 80 country offices we have empowered to connect with one another and share those incremental things that are working better and better. And then, like, your point on unmanned aerial vehicles, how can we also invest in intentionally investigating and solving some of the bigger problems we're facing through things like UAVs and 3D printing and smartphones and broadband and other things like that. And so I think we're really working kind of on a two-tier track. One is really trying to up our game in terms of connectivity and getting all of our teams talking with one another and with our partners and with everyone else out there that's trying to solve these problems. And then second, we're looking at intentional investment around some of those areas that really confound us, and it maybe confounded us for a long time, and we've just worked around. And unmanned aerial vehicles is one potential solution to infrastructure problems. And when we were awarded the supply chain contract 18 months ago, we started talking about how do we get the contract up and running, and how do we make the work happen, but also how do we at the same time invest in some of the next generation solutions that can help us to leapfrog some of the problems that we've just faced as an industry and as people working in development. And I think drones are one of those technologies that are really exciting, because if we get it right, we might be able to leapfrog an entire set of problems in delivering health commodities. And if we can deliver health commodities more efficiently using drones, I mean, then there's no end to the things that we can begin to deliver in terms of goods to rural and hard to reach parts of the world.
At the risk of turning this into a drone or UAV conversation, which I don't want to have, do you get to,
right.
We've been lucky enough, we had Ryan I'm going to screw up his name right now, Ryan Oxenhorn from a company called Zipline, who they just launched in Rwanda last summer. Did you cast the net wide in that conversation? So you're like, are you talking with them? And we've had a couple of other individuals on the podcast as well, like We Robotics. So it was that kind of conversation, or do you kind of keep it close to the chest and look internally? I mean, you said 4,000 people, 80 country offices.
If you're talking about our process, we really look at innovation as an open source subject. So yeah, we've spoken with Zipline. Actually, we had a couple of my colleagues went out to San Francisco and visited and watched as they were testing some of their equipment. And I watched in Washington, D.C. on a Skype call.
Of course, that's
actually
exactly how it should be, right?
Son. So it was a lot of fun. And the thing they're doing is so cutting edge and really incredible, and we want to be a part of it. But it's not something that we look at as proprietary. I think we're approaching these big intractable problems and our investment in trying to address them as open and trying to bring in as many potential partners as we can possibly bring in. Because at this point, we're not sure, especially when it comes to UAVs, exactly how this is going to work and what all of the pitfalls are. And so the more minds we can get around the table and the more thoughts we can have around those areas, like, for instance, policy is a major challenge that we have that we need to face when we're thinking about UAVs, and proprietary technology and technology transfer and other things like that. So we're really focusing on is open source, and we're going out, we're talking to Zipline, and we're actually doing a study right now where we're trying to assess the landscape for unmanned aerial vehicles and bring whomever is working in that area around the table and talk to them about how we might use those technologies to benefit our work.
Two things that you identified as, let's not call them challenges, or areas that you're focusing on. One is connectivity, and the other one was intentional investment. Again, for 4,000 people, 80 country offices, are you putting everybody on Slack? Or like not to give a shout out to Slack or anything, but how do you connect a company like that? What's your current thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, it's one of the core investments we're making right now. Is in we looked last year at a lot of the EdTech space, because our challenge is just as you described. It's we have amazing people working in remote places, and we need to help connect them. We need to not just help connect them. I mean, they're already connected. Frankly, they're all working on projects that have all kinds of connectivity, but we need to help them to connect with one another in a way that allows us to add value and share knowledge and expertise. And so, we've done a lot of research and a lot of, I'd say, testing of different EdTech platforms. And this last year, at the end of the year, have made about a $3 million investment in building out a global-wide EdTech platform for our staff. And the platform isn't just, here are courses you can take and sit at your desk and, receive knowledge. It's on the contrary, it's really focused on peer-to-peer exchange, on dynamic content that's coming from some of our internal work, but more than anything, people exchanging information with each other and getting that kind of content externally, whether it's this podcast or other sources of content, so that you keep coming back every day to the app, and that ecosystem of knowledge and knowledge sharing thrives. And so we're just setting out on this journey. And it'll be an interesting journey. I think the space is really beginning to evolve. And right now, when we looked at it, there's nothing that's really off the shelf. So we just decided, let's do this ourselves. And let's work with a partner. We picked a partner called EdCast. And they've been instrumental in really helping us think through this concept.
So what kind of platform is it? Is this a bespoke platform that you've built? Is this Moodle? Is this Blackboard? Is this Accord? Is this, Schoolology? What did you choose?
We looked at all of those. And it speaks to what an emerging dynamic space this is right now. And so I don't know that there's any one right solution. What we chose is to work on OpenEdX. edX and Coursera are, as you know, large open source or online education platforms.
Yeah, large books. Right?
edX happens to be open source. And so we chose a partner, EdCast, that works on edX and builds on top of it. And, we'll see. I think more than anything, it's not just the platform itself and what runs it, but for me, it's the way in which we roll it out and the ability to provide interesting dynamic content on a regular basis to keep people coming back to the platform.
I was just going to say, if I can ask the tough question there, how do you make that sexy? In a sense that, people all over the world, yourself, myself included, Facebook is a go-to, Twitter's a go-to, Snapchat's a go-to, and so how do you make this a portal that is, shows up in their feed for lack of a better term, where they say, oh yeah, of course, I'm also, this is also something that not only I care about, but also, it could make a difference into the work I'm going to do every day. Or, do you make it mandatory? You say, put it in the handbook and say, hey, look, you will check in with us every day. Are there thoughts there?
Yeah, no, that's a lot. We're spending a lot of time on that. In fact, that's why I'm saying I think the platform itself was a major decision, but it's one that I want to make quickly because for me, there's no end to the amount of information we're getting on a daily basis, all of us. So the question is, how do you cut through the static and how do you get our employees and our staff and our partners the kinds of information they want to keep them coming back on a daily basis and that allow them to really build the knowledge base themselves. We tend to talk about it as if it's a hub and spokes kind of process, but really it's a very decentralized, dynamic space that we want to create. So I think to answer your question, our thoughts are that, the required and verified trainings we have are a few, and they're not enough to really build a platform around, and we wouldn't want to do that anyway. So there'll be some requirements that people have to use the platform, but it won't keep them coming back on a daily basis. What we've decided to do is really build an end-to-end platform where you have, what I mean by that is you have in one space an ability to connect with your peers, to share interesting information you have with like-minded people, to receive dynamic external content that's tailored to you, to take your short and long courses that you're taking, whether it's through Coursera or edX or other places, and incorporate them into that same app so that they're in one place, to receive information from us, as a company and other partners we may have. And then we've created a strategic partnership with Arizona State University over the last 18 months, and we're currently pursuing the creation of a certificate program that would allow our professionals to work through our training and then be incentivized to take further trainings that are accredited, so that they might receive at either, accredited certificates or at some point a micromasters in the subject that they're working in. Micromasters is a new term for me.
I was going to say that the hashtag needs to go out immediately. I've never even heard that before. That's pretty interesting. Yeah.
And it's not something we made up. It's something that we were searching the landscape of the online education landscape, and MIT, I think, maybe been the first, but I'm not sure. But they certainly have micromasters programs. And we looked into it, and it's really a concept where as you take certificates and you earn them in areas of interest, they begin to stack. And at some point, you complete that study by earning a micromasters in whatever subject. Our thought is, let's take it to the furthest degree. We're working with ASU right now and thinking through how might we enable an entire global international development workforce, not just Chemonics, but anybody that works in international development, to operate on this platform, take these certificates, earn micromasters degrees, and then earn their way into master's programs. Because there are a lot of barriers for people living in developing countries to get into graduate programs. I mean, you have to have TOEFL exams certified by third parties. You have to have high school transcripts that are translated and everything else. And, we're beginning to explore this idea that if you've been able to achieve a level of proficiency in this micromasters, certificate, then why haven't you earned your way into a master's program? And so this concept of an online learning platform, I think what we're working with is how can we both provide something that's interesting on a daily basis that keep people coming back, but also how can we incentivize our staff to use it and to have a space where they can continue to grow and explore different subjects and earn, different types of degrees as they work through their career.
I'm so glad that you went to that next level and said, "Hey, look, we're investing in this piece, but we see something that's a lot bigger." Is that fairly typical for the Chemonics view of how, when you approach a program? And I'm not trying to be the jaded aid guy or anything like that, but so often we find that we're very program focused, we're very project focused. Things are boxed in by contracts really often. But it sounds like you're investing in something here that really not only has benefit for the organization, the company, right? I mean, I can see how this would affect retention levels. This could affect, all kinds of good things for Chemonics, but then it also potentially contributes out to that broader community. Does that speak to a value that you think Chemonics has?
I think so. I mean, the thing I love about Chemonics is we encourage risk-taking. And, it's not just me, it's everyone. I think the idea is, to be fearless, take risks, try things out, and admit it, when it's not working and move on to the next thing. And so, I think it's a value. To be honest, it's a hard one, though. It's one where you're, in a government contracting space where we have very important, serious obligations that we have to attend to, and taking time out, if you will, from that rigor of government contracting to think more broadly, to really try new ideas out, get different people around the table, isn't something that comes naturally. So I think it's something that is more practiced and has to be encouraged. So I would say, on our projects, I see it all the time. I see people that they're working on the task at hand, but are working to evolve that program to something that's much greater and has much more benefit. And, like I said, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But when it works, it's exceptional. And I think it really does speak to the culture of the company.
Hey, guys, before we move on to listen to the other types of intentional investments that Chemonics is pursuing, I want to pause here for a moment because you've been listening to the show for about 20 minutes now. And if you're finding value in my conversation with Jamey, would you please do me the favor of sharing this with your networks on Twitter or Facebook or wherever you happen to gather with other people? Or, give the podcast a rating over at iTunes or on SoundCloud, because it really does make a difference. Thanks in advance, and now back to the show. Maybe briefly, or maybe not so briefly, what other types of intentional investment are you seeing or are you overseeing it throughout Chemonics beyond this LMS system?
So we've created a concept of solution labs, and it really came out of our partnership with Arizona State. I mean, the interesting thing for me in development is that universities haven't been as infused in the international development space as they have in other government contracting spaces.
Which is, it seems like a no-brainer, right?
Right. I mean, they're spending billions of dollars on research. They're actually, working almost in the same process as we work in, where you look at the problem and you figure out how to get people around the table and you address it and you do testing and you scale. It's really fascinating that we haven't been able as an industry to benefit from that research as much as we probably should. So what we said is, Arizona State's really trying to do things a little differently, and we agreed with them. Let's try this out. Let's see if this partnership can work. And so far, it's really been a very fruitful endeavor. The thing that it's led to is, in one part, is this idea of solutions labs, where both organizations and others, again, we're really looking at this as open source, contribute and look at what is a critical challenge and get around the table with the right expertise and begin to try out different solutions. So far, we've developed 4 of those labs that are, in addition to this EdTech initiative we've talked about. We're working on something we call a Global Impact Collaboratory, which
again, I got to throw that hashtag down there. A collaboratory? That's awesome.
Collaboratory. Okay. Yeah, well, I think it's a university term, maybe, I don't know, but the team really liked it, so we ran with it.
I love it. Great.
And what I love about it is that this is coming straight out of research. It's Dr. Alex Brewster-Slade at ASU, who's pioneered some different ways of gathering data that are low cost and highly replicable. It's basically true-false questionnaires and things like that you can train people to do. And when we heard about this, we said, hey, that really applies to our work across the board. So a colleague of ours, Peggy Ochandarina, latched onto this, and she's been working with Alex, and the two of them have been to Haiti and Mozambique. In Mozambique, we have a project where we're working on climate resiliency, and it has a lot to do with community engagement. So we had already run our baseline and our data gathering, but we came in and we said to USAID, hey, look, we'd like to try this new methodology out, and we'd like to compare it to the methodology we traditionally use. And USAID and our partners said, that's great, let's go. And so we paid for this ourselves. We invested in it along with ASU, and we're waiting on the results. We'll see how it looks. The hope is we get results that are at least as good as what we've gotten in the traditional way for a lot less money. And if we do that, we can. There's no end to the amount of application this has in our space.
Fantastic.
And if it doesn't work, there's some other things they're working on that we'll try out.
Nice. We already have our hook for it. We already have our hook for a follow-up in 6 months, I guess.
Yeah, we're working on a low resource setting logistics lab with ASU as well. And we're just getting started on this, but it relates to our supply chain work and really where the opportunities exist to improve upon supply chain work and development is at that last mile. And there are so many technologies. We talked about unmanned aerial vehicles, for example. There's just so many things like that exist that we think can be combined and blended together in different ways. And so the team has really gotten together, and they're beginning to sort through what are those technologies that we want to, or techniques, technologies, and other approaches that we want to begin to explore. We've done some work on a youth violence prevention lab where the team is working on and has tried out in a few settings social media analysis to identify youth who are at risk for violence. And it's really a couple of colleagues, Michelle Piercy and Enrique Bentoncourt, who are pioneering this work with ASU and a few other partners, John Jay College, Yale University, and thinking about how do we identify the 2% of the youth that contribute to 80 or 90% of the violence in many cases in a way that's predictive and allows us to, through geospatial analysis and other things, get ahead of the curve and not be reactive. And then the last one, we're working with a group called BankU on blockchain solutions, which is an enormous emerging area. And is one we could talk about, and I'm sure a different podcast for another hour.
Definitely a whole nother show. But yeah, that many of our guests have mentioned blockchain as one of their game changers they'd like to see move forward.
Yeah, no, a colleague of mine, Josh Leland, approached me last year and said, look, this is something we've got to start looking at. And so we found a partner, BankQ, and their focus is really on how to provide economic identities to people that have, suffered from man-made or natural disasters. And so we're thinking about the application of this work in refugee camps, but we're also thinking of it more broadly as well. Things like people that receive some of the health commodities we deliver. How do we help them by providing them with access and ownership over their own health records that they can then transport from one clinic to another, through the blockchain and through biometric markers. So I think it's an exciting area. It's definitely one of the newest emerging areas that we're exploring. For us, I think the key is that we're embarking upon 2 or 3 initiatives right away to see if we can test it out and actually see if it applies or not, because there's so much conceptual work being done right now with IBM and so many others.
Maybe as an aside, but you've mentioned ASU quite a few times as a strategic partner in a lot of these initiatives. Is there a reason behind that? I mean, do they have a particular focus on innovation or breaking the mold somehow, or they're just the university on your mind right now?
No, it's been intentional. When we started trying to create what we're calling a knowledge enterprise and really work at this connectivity and investing in finding solutions to these big problems, we looked for a university partner, and actually ASU's been ranked first in innovation for the last couple of years. And the thing that struck us about them is that they're really willing to break some of the molds that have challenged us as a development organization and working with universities. So one of the things that they do is they bring professors from a variety of different colleges and different walks of life and expertise to the table. And they work in a much less siloed way than you'd find at a university. They have I almost call like an ecosystem of institutions that are working with and around the university, so that they have foundations and technology transfer, ASTI, technology transfer enterprise. They have online learning and education platform. Actually, it's called EdPlus. It's one of the leading platforms in the country. And so all of these different assets that they have aren't just, they're not unique to ASU, but what's unique is that they're bringing them to the table and saying, how can we take these assets and apply them in the international development setting? And so from that point of view, we really are focused on trying to make this strategic partnership work for us and also just work for development in general, because like we spoke about, it's kind of odd that our industry hasn't really embraced the research, agenda that we invest billions in our country.
What about, again, not to go too off topic here, but what about, I know that one of the consistent challenges in working with higher institutes of higher education is they work at a very different pace than a Chemonics or another, especially like a relief agency or another development agencies as we know it. Have you been able to find that a partner that in ASU that is able to overcome some of those bureaucratic hurdles and going around the committees and getting these just sort of not having to deal with the academic calendar kind of thing as well? Is that the kind of mindset there as well, or maybe you can't speak to that?
No, I can totally speak to it. I think it's one of the biggest hurdles we have in working with universities. And I'm not going to say it's perfect, but at the same time, I think we've gone a long way in overcoming it. We have a steering committee that it consists of some of the deans and the university leaders, as well as leaders from our organization. They meet twice a year, and they really work to address specific issues like that. How do we get access to the amazing faculty and students and research that's being done in the time frame that we need it? And I'd say so far, on the day-to-day, we've been able to overcome a lot of those challenges. I think there are some where we've looked and we've said that's a multi-year endeavor, and our client and our beneficiaries don't have multi-year appetites, so we've avoided a couple of initiatives for that reason. But, like talking about the Global Impact Collaboratory, that's a good example of where we took something that took many years to develop but was ready to be tested and applied in a development setting. So I think, we're cognizant of that. We're really looking for those places where the research has hit a point where it's ready for field testing and where we have opportunity to add exponential value based upon the research that's been done.
So you've got this connectivity piece that you talked about earlier. You've got these investments that you're making. If we wake up 5 years from now, what's Chemonics look like? How are these changing the way that you're able to deliver the assistance you're delivering, or does it change other fundamentals with the organization?
We're debating that a lot. And I think the thing that strikes me, in 2007, there was a TED Talk documentary that I watched. And in 2007, the guy that really awed the crowd was somebody that walked out. He had a computer screen, and he was able to manipulate it with his hands. And so when we talk about 5 or 10 years, I keep coming back to the fact that things are changing so fast. And,
yeah, the acceleration of change is crazy.
I think, the thing that I'm looking at, and we're debating, is what are those game changers that are emerging right now, and how do we blend them together in a way that is immediately applicable in our work? And so we've picked out 8 areas that we think in 5 or 10 years are going to change the landscape of development. And this is really what's behind a lot of those lab and EdTech investments that we're making. And they're things like smartphones and broadband connectivity, which are kind of no-brainers at this point. But, when you combine them together with alternative energy solutions and unmanned aerial vehicles, you have suddenly this ability to not only interact with people anywhere on a sustained basis, but provide different kinds of goods and commercial opportunities across places where we've had trouble accessing for decades or for time immemorial. We're talking to IBM and others about cognitive computing and some of the opportunities there with our health colleagues, and how you might create clinical applications that allow community health workers to do their work better in very remote settings. Blockchain technology, we talked about that. And some of the things that are sort of on the edge that haven't yet been introduced into the space, but, virtual reality, where maybe in 5 years, 10 years, we'll be able to sit in classrooms together, even though we're in 20 or 30 different countries and different parts of the world. So I think it's those emerging technologies that have really, gotten our attention, and our thinking about them is really around not the concepts, but rather the application, and how do you combine those new technologies in ways that are immediately beneficial to the people we work for.
Do you think there's any chance that, or maybe this has happened in the past in your tenure at Chemonics, where something has come out of the woodworks, or sort of come out of the cloud of all these emerging technologies and processes and thoughts that really caught you off guard, and you're like, wow, we didn't even see this coming, and was just really a big disruptor for you? Or completely change the game about how you might deliver a program, or might communicate with your staff or anything?
So yeah, the thing I come to is how smartphones have been proliferating around the world for a while, and suddenly social networks have become such an important part of the way people communicate, and it has these really interesting applications, right? So like we're working with, 10 years ago, we're trying to get messages out and affect behavior change and just provide good information to different populations. So we were working with, in Lebanon, barbers and hairdressers, because that's where people congregated to get their information. And in Kenya, we were working with rural radio stations, and same in Nepal. Just 5-10 years ago, that was sort of the standard approach. And I mean, as you know, and we all know these days, it's really social media and the power of getting messages out to people in real time and getting real time feedback. And so, in our Kenya program, what surprised me when I was looking at the work we were doing is that we were doing rural radio at the same time as pushing SMS messaging and looking for real time feedback during presidential debates. And it really opened my eyes at that time, and this was only 2 or 3 years ago, to the power of the smartphone and how much it was changing the way that we do our work. And I mean, if you take it to its furthest extreme, you can see that in, the Arab Spring and other places where massive disruption has happened, good and bad, as a result of that connectivity and that ability to communicate at a moment's notice with a wide variety of people in a wide variety of settings.
The talk up till now has been extraordinarily optimistic. And maybe let's not even say extraordinarily, but you're lucky enough to be in a position where you have some decent resources that you can, invest in these issues and these problems, these challenges. You can pay attention to them. You've got smart people and smart groups, working on them. What are the hurdles to this? What are the roadblocks? What are the things that get in your way as an organization like Chemonics, when you're either looking at these new solutions or trying to put something together or even just sort of have that new idea? What gets in your way?
Yeah, I think so. We talked about connectivity. I think that's one of the biggest things. I mean, there's just so much information coming at people so fast in such a wide variety that, how do we actually cut through all of that and find the meaningful stuff that we need on a daily basis to do our jobs better and to innovate and to share innovations? That's huge. But I think if I had to say the biggest challenge we face is taking all of these different things that we've talked about today and packaging them in a sustainable model. This isn't sort of the innovation space, but it's taking innovation and really putting it into a financial or business plan package that allows local entrepreneurs and others that can benefit from it to really scale it and proliferate it. And I think in our space that is really one of the missing links. And across everything we've discussed, it's one of those areas that we're trying to address. I would say that it's one of the known concerns that I have and our team has that we're beginning to bring experts in. We're working, for instance, right now on behalf of the Gates Foundation to commercialize an aflatoxin product in Africa to help prevent aflatoxin from occurring. So it's not just us. It's this idea of how do you take these breakthroughs and commercialize them, get them in the hands of the people that need them, but do it in a way that's sustainable and keeps that technology or that breakthrough coming for years to come.
I want to package this somehow. You're essentially touching on the pilot syndrome that we have throughout the industry, where everything's, especially all things innovation are a pilot. And speaking of the Gates Foundation, they just announced a pilot. Gosh, now I'm forgetting it on this particular call, but where it's a new payment system in an African country, which again I'm forgetting right now. But it was specifically put on the table as, hey, this is this new initiative, and it's a pilot initiative. And getting beyond that, we really have this. I'm going to harken back to 30 minutes ago when you were saying it's about taking those risks and being able to put it out there and saying, look, let's not do the pilot. Let's actually build to last, build to sustain and build to scale.
I completely agree. And I think, when we work with private sector partners, the interesting thing to me is that there are a lot of misses that we've had over the last several years that we've engaged. We've had some wins, but more often than not, it's the misses that I look at and ask, why did that happen? And it's often because we have this initial first meeting and it's great. Everybody's on the same page. What if we could do this? In the second meeting, typically the financial or executive personnel shows up and they ask a lot of hard questions. Well, how do you get a return on investment? What's the sustainability of this? What kind of capital do I need to put in, and where's the break even? And, we're not unique. I mean, that inability to really model not just the initial pilot, but how that pilot would then be scaled to a point where it's taken away from you and proliferated through somebody else is really one of those areas that, everybody's struggling with it. It's not just us.
What I find interesting is are you struggling with it because there's a mindset of, oh crap, we don't know what to do now that we've got a pilot and we've got it out there testing? Or is it we're not willing to take the risk, we don't have the investment, we don't know how to put that package together? You deal with market structures, like you just said. You deal with introducing new products into markets. You're a commercial organization, you get it. And so what do you think the leap is there from commercializing a product or for lack of a better term, commercializing, but taking that pilot, especially when you've deemed it, wow, this actually worked, and putting it out there? Is it that through the scale process it might fail and therefore the investment might go bust? Is it as simple as that?
Yeah, I think so. You see it across all of the social impact investing conferences that we attend, where there's this huge missing middle. So there's a lot of investment at the $10,000, $100,000 level that presumably is worthwhile and sustained. Otherwise, I'm not sure why people would be coming back to it. And then there's this enormous investment bank investment that's happening. So, it's what I saw when I was working in microfinance in the mid-2000s. These large institutions that want a social return on some of their investment, and so they're putting hundreds of millions in. But there's this big missing middle of viable deals, of viable opportunities. And I think it's the next space in terms of taking these technologies and figuring out how to commercialize them, is really looking at that $1 to $10 million space for investment and asking, how do we package this up in a way that's lucrative to a social impact investor to not only, receive a social return, but also a financial return as well. And by the way, not just here. I mean, like a lot of the social impact investing are investors in Asia and Africa, Latin America, and other places we work. So
I was just going to say, we can't have the narrow view. We can't have the narrow view that, it's only people in the United States or
not at all.
That there's where I'm sitting right now, Bangkok, there is a tremendous amount of wealth, and it's looking for opportunity. And so I think you've really, you've touched on a subject that is dear to many people's hearts, but it's also, have you internally discussed what is that value proposition that you put out there? Because the return on one of these investments is going to be less, but there's going to be social kickback as well, right? Do you see the appetite for impact investing, for social investing? Is that growing? I mean, is that ecosystem becoming larger and larger, and perhaps maybe I'm just not seeing the forest growing right now, or does it need to be much more actively cultivated?
I think it's both. I mean, I was just out in Thailand last May, and you're absolutely right. It is a vibrant, dynamic economy with plenty of people that are investing and doing business. And we were at a Global Impact Network forum in Amsterdam in November, and I look at the two, and so on one hand you have this pool of capital and entrepreneurship that's happening all over the world. On the other hand, you have a group of social impact investors that are looking for that deal. And I think, the statistics show that the appetite for social impact investing is really growing. I think, we've all seen, and the data shows that there's this missing middle of deals to actually meet the supply of capital that's out there to invest. So our thoughts are, if that's the case, we're not going to fix that. How can we harness the power of these new technologies and new breakthroughs in a way that creates commercializable opportunities? And if we do that, how do we package them in a way that allows us to scale and hand over the technology to the people that need it and will use it? And I think it really gets at the heart of development itself, which is, it's not going to be the Wall Street banking community that is going to solve the problem. It's going to be local banks and local investors and entrepreneurs who are going to take these ideas and actually are beginning to develop, not beginning, but have been developing these innovative breakthroughs themselves. One thing about Chemonics is that we're 90% of our staff are local professionals. So when I talk about this, it's really from that perspective. We were just in Kenya as an example, and there's a company that we've been working with, and they're creating mobile educational Wi-Fi centers. So they're the size of a suitcase, and you can, go to a remote area. They're solar powered. You open them up, and there are 40 tablets inside. And it's a self-contained unit. The tablets all run on the Wi-Fi that's generated by the suitcase type apparatus. And so you have a mobile classroom. And it's an example for me of one of the innovations that's being developed. It's being developed in Kenya that's really exciting. And it's piloted. It's ready to commercialize. And it's a good example of where I think the appetite for social investing and those kinds of innovations are sitting there ready to be introduced to one another in a way that makes sense to both sides.
Sounds like somebody listening to this program needs to set up a broker firm immediately.
That would be great. I think we would probably hire them.
I have two questions that I ask everybody in this innovation series that's on the podcast, and I'm very intrigued to hear what your answers might be. One of them is, who do you pay attention to? I mean, you've been in Chemonics for 20 years. You've been around the world, probably 1,000 times. Obviously, you listen to your staff, you listen to the people on the ground, you listen internally. But are there blogs? Are there Twitter feeds? Are there magazines? Are there is there a newspaper columnist that you think they just get it? That this is where you get your source of information. You think other people should know about it?
Like everybody, I have proliferation of apps on my phone. And so for me, the go-to apps are Fast Company. I think from a point of view of running a business, it's a source of great insight, Harvard Business Review and things like that. From a development perspective, it's interesting because it's kind of the opposite. It's not as institutionalized. There are a lot of people that blog, and there are a number of staff and partners that I connect with. And in thinking about this question, I think it's kind of interesting that from a development point of view, it is more of a social network and informal sourcing of information and insights than it is something that's out there that I think is a seminal source that I go to.
It's the universe that speaks to you, and I don't mean that in sort of a transcendent way. It's just it really does provide. As much as that's sort of a silly thing to say, it's amazing how things end up on your desk. They bubble up, as you need them to show up. The last question I have is, what are you geeking out on right now? You're lucky enough to be at the top of a fairly large ecosystem that you just said. Like you just said, smartphones, broadband, alternative energy, UAVs, blockchain. You're thinking of it all. Is there and you also just gave us the suitcase Wi-Fi solution. Is there something else that you just like to geek out on, or you'd like to give a shout out to that you think it's coming down the pipe? This is going to make a huge difference. People should pay attention to.
I mean, this is going to be kind of an anti-answer, I'm afraid, but the thing I'm geeking out on at the moment is the lean startup approach in development. What I mean by that is taking the different things we've talked about, and predominantly right now it's our EdTech work that we're doing, and putting it in people's hands. It's so easy now to develop a prototype and put it in somebody's hands and have them play with it, break it, provide feedback, and go through this iterative building process together. And I think why I'm geeking out on it is that it goes back to the previous part of our discussion. I mean, how many hospitals have we walked through in developing countries where we see a hallway that's just abandoned equipment that was a product of good intentions that didn't have the ecosystem of support needed to continue to use that equipment, and how many great ideas have led to innovations of products that have never been able to get to the places they need to go. And I think this process that's being used in the sense that it's being used with app design and things like that, and not necessarily production, is really interesting. And it's one that allows us to get immediate feedback from a wide variety of different potential users and continue to iterate, fail fast, and move products forward. And so that's what I'm geeking out on right now, is just that concept and that ability to do something that we've wanted to do for a long time, and now through a variety of communications technologies can finally embark upon.
I had to follow up. Is it something where you've been able to push lean canvas down the pipe and say, look, this is something that we're going to use, or like actually taking those pieces, or is this a fairly isolated incident across Chemonics and your programs?
So it's just starting. I think it's something that we've done. I mean, as a company, we've always worked in an iterative fashion. You try something out, work together to fail and continue to build and improve until you get to a product. But it's really, that has been in offices and on teams. The difference for me now is that we can do this across our global workforce, and we can engage people who have insights that are far greater than mine will ever be, and immediately access them in ways that allow us to move our work forward more quickly. But I think most importantly, and this is the big assumption that we'll test out, is the ability to get the actual solution right for the individuals that are in the countries where we're working in a way that's that can be scaled more broadly. And so it's something we've always done, but it's just something that we're doing now at a different scale and I think a little bit more intentionally.
Jamey, this has been just a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your insights and sort of opening up the book of Chemonics and letting us in for a while.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity as well.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from Aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.